Are on Daf Tzadi Ches Amid Aleph. We are a few lines into the page. The Gemara says V'kama Amma Beinanis. It's about 8 lines into the page. We had described yesterday that the average Amma in the Beis Hamikdash was called an Amma Beinanis, which is an Amma of 6 Tfachim. The Gemara says, the Gemara speaks it up, V'kama Amma Beinanis. How big is this Amma Beinanis? The Gemara says, it's 6 Tvachim, and the proof is from the Mishnah. Meir said that an Amma Beinanis was the Shulchan, and the Shulchan was 2 Ammas by 1 Amma, and he said, how many Tvachim was it? 12 and 6. So you see that Amma Beinanis is 6 Tvachim. Says the Gemara, Rav Yesi Barav and Afa Nanami Tinina, Meir Oimer, HaShulchan Arka Shnei Meser, V'Rachbei Shisha. So you see that the average Amma in the Beis HaMikdash was an Amma of 6 Tvachim. Now, here's the problem, though. So we've seen that there's different options. There's an Amma of 5 Tvachim. Today's not math. There's an Amma of 5 Tvachim, or there's an Amma of 6 Tvachim. So we said that the average Amma in the Beis HaMikdash was Amma Beinanis, which is 6 Tvachim. Beinanis means a middle. If the 6 Tvachim is the middle, that means that there's something bigger than it, right? Because if the 6 is the biggest option, which till now we've only had 5 and 6, so 6 is the biggest, you wouldn't call it Amma Beinanis. You'd say Amma Gavoya, Amma Elyoina, whatever. Amma Beinanis implies that it's the average measure, not that it's the average, that it's the majority 6 or 5. It means that it's the average, the middle measurement, which means there's something bigger. So says the Gemara, you see from here that there's actually something bigger than the 6 Tvachim Amma, and the answer is there was. The Gemara says, there was. V'atanan, as the Mishnah describes, there was a room in the Beis HaMikdash called the Shushan Habira room. The Gemara says, Shtei Amas Hayu B'Shushan Habira. This room, this chamber called B'Shushan Habira, as the Gemara is going to explain, that it had the skyline of Shushan Habira outlined on the top of the ark above the room. In that room, it had 2 sticks that were measuring sticks. Achas al Keren Mizrachas Safainis, one on the northeast corner, Achas al Keren Mizrachas Draimis, and one on the southeast corner. These rulers, Shal Keren Mizrachas Safainis, Yisera al Shal Moshe Chatzi Espa. The one of them was 6 tefach and a half a finger. So a half a finger more than 6 tefach. So 6 tefach and a half a finger. And Shal al Keren Mizrachas Draimis, I'm sorry, and the one in the southeast corner was an additional half a finger, i.e., a full finger breadth bigger than the 6 tefachim. Now, before we get to what was the purpose of it, so you see there was something bigger. There's 5, there's 6, and then there's these 2 options, 6 and a half finger breadth, 6 and a full finger breadth. Now, lama amru achas gedola v'achas kitana. What was the purpose of these measuring tools? If I'm using 6 tefachim, why do I need a 6 tefach and a half a finger? 6 tefach and a full finger. So the Gemara says, Kadesho umnin noitlin b'ktana umachzirin b'gdoila. Basically, Kadesho liyavli demi'ila. Okay, so basically it's like this. When the Beis HaMikdash would hire contractors, they would pay them for the material. So they would say to the contractor, we're paying you $10 and we want, let's say, the wall to be 10 feet long, okay? When they were measuring out, when they were paying for the contract, they were measuring out based on the 6 tefach contract. That's what they're paying for. They're paying for the materials. Right? When you pay a worker, you have to pay for the materials and the labor. So when I'm paying, the Beis HaMikdash is paying for the materials, they're measuring it out with the 6 tefach. But when the workers would deliver, they would have to use the bigger one. The reason being is because if they return using the same measuring style, exactly 6, it's possible that they'll be off a little bit and they'll be stealing from the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, in order to what? If I pay for 6 feet of lumber and it's measuring out a ruler, and then Ari the contractor is returning it and he's measuring it out and he's a little bit off, that means that I paid for 6 feet of length, but he only returns 5 feet and 11 inches. And he stole a little bit from the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, in order to avoid that, whenever they returned it and they were measuring it out, they had to return it with a little bit more. They were using a little bit of a broader stick. So in other words, they were always delivering slightly more than they promised. Now, that's why it was, again, the Metzias, you have to understand. I mean, if you're in construction, you'll understand that you're paying for the materials, so they're measuring out the materials, and then they bring it in and they're returning it, and the point is they basically use a slightly larger measuring stick for the return, not for what I promised. I promised based on 6 tefach, but they're returning it based on 6 tefach and a half a finger breadth, or 6 tefach and a full finger breadth, in order to avoid me'ilah. They want to basically always return a little bit more to the Beis HaMikdash than they promised, as opposed to, God forbid, taking more money and returning less. Now the question is, okay, that makes sense. Now the question is, why a half a finger breadth and a full finger breadth? The answer is, it depends what they're measuring out. If you're measuring out bricks and sheetrock, full finger breadth. If you're measuring out gold and silver, a half a finger breadth, because gold and silver is so expensive, we don't want to rip them off too much. So a half a finger breadth is enough to avoid the concern. So it just depends on what material they were measuring it out. Says the Gemara, and why do they need these 2 measuring tools? One was used for measuring gold and silver. So I pay for $10 for a foot of gold. They're going to use the 6 tefach and half a finger breadth one to give me the foot, because they're going to always deliver a little bit more, but not a full finger breadth, because we don't want to rip them off. Now, Tanan Hasam, Shar HaMizrach Olav Shushan Bir Tzura. This room was called Shushan Bir because above the skyline above the room, there was, in the ark, it was carved out, the skyline of Shushan Bir. Now, my time, why was it carved out like this? Shows you what the second Beis HaMikdash was. The second Beis HaMikdash was not a shikl shell of itself. The first, Mamish had a skyline of Shushan Bir. So it says the Gemara, my time, the Medrash says that when they saw that, the Zakanim who remember the first Beis HaMikdash used to cry when they would see this. So my time, why would they carve out the Shushan Bir skyline? So, Rav Chizda, Rav Yitzchak bar Dimi. First of all, it's to remember where they came from. 2 pshatim in Rashi, what this means. The first pshat is the Persians, when Cyrus allowed them to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, said, remember where you come from. So that was to sort of carve out, as an homage. The other pshat is a thank you to Hashem for the miracle of Purim. Okay, but the first pshat, the basic pshat of Rashi is that, it's not. You don't want a Yeshua based on Trump allowing it. You understand? That's what they had. They had Cyrus allowing them to build the Beis HaMikdash, and they had to remember that by describing the skyline. The second shot is that the Persians made them do this because they were afraid of an uprising. So it wasn't, for them to thank the king. It was, to sort of always be humbled and to make sure that they don't have an uprising. Either way, it was ordained by the Persian government. Rav Yanai says you should always have fear of the government. Even if the government that you're under is not a chashuv government, you're supposed to have respect and fear. Where do we find this? Shenemar, because Moshe Rabbeinu is describing going out to the Midbar, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, Moshe Rabbeinu is describing this is describing Makas B'choros, I believe. Yeah, this is describing Makas B'choros. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, "V'yardu kol avadecha elai v'yishtachavu leiman," and all of your servants, all the Egyptians, will come and bow to me, basically saying, "Get out." Now, included in that was Paro himself. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say that. He said, "Your servants." He didn't want to say that Paro will bow down to him because that's not respectful of the government. Even if it's a terrible government, you have to have a emes malchus aleim. Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm sorry, he didn't mention you're also going to bow down to me. Rabbi Yochanan says a different source. Mehacha shenemar, v'yad Hashem ha'isa Eliyo, v'yishanes masna v'yoretz l'fnei achav ad boyacha Yisraela. The pasuk says that Eliyahu Navi put his, he put his sword and he got his clothes together and he ran in front of Achav, even though Achav was terrible because he saw that Achav was being unescorted and a king should not go unescorted, so he escorted the king. Okay, now that we mentioned this machlokes, we're going to mention another machlokes. There's a nevuah that when Mashiach comes, right by the Bayis Shlishi, right by the Kodesh Kadashim of the third Beis HaMikdash, there's going to be Ola L'Trufa, leaves of healing. There's going to be trees that will have leaves, and if you eat the leaves, it'll cause you to heal. That's what people will do. When Mashiach comes, if someone has an ailment, they'll go over there and they'll eat the leaf and they'll feel better. Now, which ailment does the tree heal? Says the Gemara, Rav Chizda, Rav Yitzchak bar Dimi, L'Trufa. Trufa means medicine, but the way the Gemara is darshing, it's lahater peh. It's to open up the mouth, to open up that which is closed, but that should be open. So what is it referring to? So chad amr lahater peh shalamayla. One person, or one opinion says that means that if there's a kid who's mute, if you have a child who can't speak, lahater peh, they'll give him the leaf and he'll start speaking. Chad amr lahater peh shalamata. And one says that it's to open up the orifices below, which is a reference to a woman who can't have children. That if a woman, that part of that body is unable to have a child, she'll eat a leaf and she'll have a child. So that's Valu Trufa. Says Gemara Itmar, we have a similar machlokes, Chizki Amar Lahata Pe Liyumim, that it's to open up the mouths of the mute. Par Kapara Amar Lahata Pe Akaris. Okay. Now, One more ha'ara, and then we will start the sugya of the day. The pasuk describes, now we know this because we're sort of just familiar with it. There were 12 loaves of the lechem apanim, 2 rows of 6. Now the pasuk, let me just read you the 2 psukim. The pasuk says, "V'lekachto soiles v'avisa oisa," you shall bake it. Shteim esrei chalas, okay, 12 chalas. That's point number 1. 12 chalas. Then it says, "Samta oisam shtei mareches," 2 groupings of sheish mareches al shulchan, of 6 each. So it's like there's 12, there's 2 groupings, and each group has 6. Okay, it's like, is there any shorter way to get that information across? The Gemara is going to point out how each one is necessary, because if it just said 12, maybe it's 12 in one stack. If it just says 2 groupings, maybe it's 4 and 8. And if it just said stacks, maybe it's 3 stacks of 4. And the reason why you need all this is basically once you have all these psukim, then you realize it's 12 total, 2 stacks of 6. There's no other shorter way to do it. Each one is... No, because that implies if you don't say 12, then maybe it's 2 stacks of 6, but there's really a 3rd stack the pasuk is not referencing. Once you say 12, that means there's a max. There's a cap. I don't know. The Gemara says, "Tanu Rabbanon ilu nemar v'lekachta soilis v'afi soisim shtei mesri chalas v'soitam shtei mareches." If it just said 12 and 2 stacks, v'lei nemar sheish, and it doesn't mention how much is in each stack. I mean, if it says 12 and 2 stacks, I'd figure it out. 6 and 6. No. Hayisi amar achashal arba v'achashal shmona. I could think that it doesn't have to be 6 and 6. It could be 4 and 8 or 5 and 7. And therefore, l'kach nemar sheish. Therefore, it says no. Each stack is 6. V'ilem shtei marecha sheish maroches. And if it just said 2 stacks of 6, but it did not say a total of 12, hayisi amar shalish shel sheish. I would say maybe there's more than 2 stacks. The Torah is just mentioning a minimum of 2, but maybe there could be more than 2, and there could be 18. L'kach nemar shtei mesrei. And if it just said 12 and it didn't mention 2 stacks of 6, I'd say maybe there's 3 stacks of 4 each. You need all 3 of these psukim to get this point across, that it's 2 stacks of 6. So how was the formation? You have 2 stacks of 6. And if the Kohanim instead do 4 and 8, it's not Yotza. Now, Shtayim shel Sheva Sheva, what happens if I do 2 stacks of 7 each? 2 stacks of 7 each. I did too many. Is too many a problem, or is too many, is too many Yotza? That's the question. Is too many a problem, or is too many Yotza? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Oimer, Rabbi has a shita. Royin es hal yoina kilu ena. Rabbi says 2 stacks of 7 is fine. We look at the top one as if it's not there.
It depends how you hold where the bazik can go. If it's on top,
thank you.
If it's on top,
he could have waited 10 seconds for the Gemara to say that. Yeah, so the Gemara says that if it's 2 stacks of 7, Rebbe says the top one, we look at the top one as if it's not there. But here's the shaila. He made a good point. The spoons of the bazikin are on the top bread. So how could you say that we look as if it's not there? Well, then where is the spoons of frankincense? So says the Gemara, Habi'inam nesata al. But what about the spoons of frankincense? Amarli Rav Chisda Rav Hamnuna, V'amarli Rav Hamnuna, Rav Chisda, Rebbe l'tamei, Damar al b'samach. Rebbe's shita is that al doesn't mean on top; it means near it. The way Rashi understands this, it means Rebbe's shita is, as we saw in the Mishnah, that the 2 spoons of frankincense were not on the bread; they were on the table. So it doesn't have a problem; it doesn't matter. Now there is other shitas that hold. The second Shan Rashi is that Rebbe really held it was on the bread, but he holds that al b'samach means it doesn't have to. Is this someone working? Oh, it doesn't have to be mamish. It doesn't have to be mamish. I know. It doesn't have to be mamish on the top, on the bread itself. Close enough, so it's hovering is enough. But Pashas, the Pashas Pshan Rashi is that Rebbe holds that the spoons of frankincense were on the table. That's a Pshan Rashi. Tais says a different malach. But Rashi Pshan is that it was on the table, and therefore it's not a problem. Taka, if you held that it was on the bread, it could be a problem if it's too high up. Now, the Gemara says, Tanya, how do I know the Rebbe holds that al, when it says the frankincense is on the bread, al doesn't mean on means near. This is Rebbe Oimer, al b'nesata merechas levayin nezaka, al b'samach, atar al b'samach al mamish, maybe it's on top. Kishoimer v'sakoisel or nesaparoiches. The pasuk says that the paroiches, the curtain, were on the aron. They weren't on the aron; they were in front of the aron. So the answer is al doesn't mean on top. Al means near. So to over here, the frankincense, when it says on the bread, it means near the bread, and it was placed on the table.
Was on the arm. Touch the pole.
Well, we're going to get to that, but that's not on the aron. That's on the poles of the aron. Now, let me explain the next Gemara outside. If you see what I'm doing, it'll make it a lot easier. Okay. This table, think of this table, this length of this table, it's like a rectangle. Think of this as the entire Beis HaMikdash. Now we said in the Mishnah that all the kalim were lengthwise. This is Rabbi Shita, that all the kalim were east to west. So that means the shulchan was in the direction, the flow of the building. The building is horizontal, lengthwise, so the shulchan was lengthwise. The menorah was lengthwise. Everything is lengthwise, except for one, and that's the aron. The aron was like this. So think of this room as the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So you have the Ulam, Heichel, Kodesh HaKadoshim. You'd expect the aron to be lengthwise with the building. It was widthwise. Now the question is, how do you know this? So I'll tell you how you know this. I'll just say it outside, and we'll see it inside. The way you know this is, I think most of us would not assume this way. The pictures do help, but most of us would assume that this is the aron, right? It's a rectangular box. This is the aron. You'd assume that the poles were along the lengthwise, but they weren't. They were actually along the width. The pole was over here, the pole was over here. And the Gemara is going to point out the reason being is because if the poles were in the lengthwise, which I don't know if for some reason in my head that's the way it was, but if it was, there's not enough room for two people to stand in between. It's too narrow. So a pole was over here, a pole was over here, and that's where they would carry it. So here's the deal. Here's what we know. What we know for sure is the poles were across the width over here. Like the poles were like this. And what we also know is that the poles stuck into the curtains. Now, if the curtain's over here and the poles are this way, by definition, that means that the aron was not the length of the building. The aron was the opposite direction. Meaning, this is the building. This is what you'd expect the aron to be. But if that's the case, then the poles would be going not into the parochas, because the parochas is over here. The fact that I know the poles are on the width, that means the poles over here, and I know the poles stuck into the parochas, which means the only way to make that work is if the aron was not with the building, it was against the grain of the building. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Sort of? The entire aron you'd expect to be in the length of the building. Right. Where were the poles? The poles were against the width, over here. If the aron is the way you'd expect with the length of the building, the poles are not touching the parochas. Because the parochas is over here, right? Ulam, Heichel, parochas, Kodesh HaKadoshim. But I know that the poles stuck into the parochas, which means, by definition, I think of it like this, if the poles stick into the parochas, that means that the aron is this way. They were sticking in, they were pushing into the curtain. There's a picture gather. The picture gather helps. The point is, the main thing to realize is that the poles were along the width. I put like the, says the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan, I'm sorry. Tan Rabbanan, Kol HaKelim Shel B'Mikdash, Arkan LaArka Shel Bayis. The average kli in the Beis HaMikdash was lengthwise with the flow of the building. That the lengthwise was going east to west with the flow of the building, all the length of the building. Chutz me aron, except for the aron. The aron was the only one where it was like this. It wasn't with the length of the building. It was against the width of the building. The Gemara says, that's the way it was. And that's where the poles were. Now the Gemara implies that the way I know this is because of the poles. What happened?
It's not a cleat. It's in the ring.
It's a clay. Says the Gemara, Micah Amar, why is it mentioning the poles? What does the poles have to do with it? The answer is the poles are the key. The poles is the indication. I had it yesterday. It's sort of in the front of the. I don't know. Anyway, the Gemara says, Micah Amar, Hachi Kamar. The Gemara says the explanation is as follows: because of the poles, that's how we know where it was situated in the Beis Hamikdash. Badav minalan. What does that mean? So the Gemara says, Tanya v'yarichu habadim yochel lo yahayu noigim beparoiches. Now we know the badim. It says v'yarichu badim. They're very long. Now you might think that they were in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but they didn't touch the paroiches. Tamaloimer v'yirou. You could see them from outside. That means that they were sticking out. Says the Gemara. Now, v'yirau means that you could see them outside. Maybe they mamish went through the pareiches, meaning they pushed so far out that you could actually see the poles. So Gemara says, no. Tama lo yirau achutza. You couldn't. Hakesa, go to the next page. They were pushing against the pareiches, like the breasts of a woman. It's a pel de gezach. The Gemara used that as a description, but it's not for now. The Gemara says, "Shenemar soror hamar doidili bein shada yalin." I know. I'm saying it's a pella. It's not a pella in the Gemara. It's a pella in the Shir Hashem. I don't mean a pella as in. Let me explain, because sometimes there's comments. Let me explain. When I say a pella, that doesn't mean that there's something inappropriate about Shir Hashem. It's a pella means it's a wonder that I don't understand. That's the point. It's a pella for humans to understand. Point is, the Gemara says, "Uminalan tebadav." No. So the point of the Gemara is, it was going. We know that the pareiches were sticking into the poles were sticking into the pareiches, and because I told you before that the poles were along the width of it, meaning they were going along the width, not along the length, by definition, if they're sticking in, that means that it was not going to the grain of the building, it was going against it. Now, this is making a presumption that the poles were not along the length of the aron, they were along the width of the aron. So the Gemara says, how do I know this? Maybe they were along the length of it. Amrav Yehuda, Trei Gavri Ba'amsa Upalga Loi Mistakiluhu. The aron was very, very narrow. It was only an am and a half wide. If you had two poles and you had two people standing within the poles, there's not enough room. Therefore, the poles had to be along the width. And now there's enough room for someone to stand over here and someone to stand over here. Because if it's by the... I don't know. I guess even if you're standing on the outside, it's already a little bit tight because it's only an am and a half is 36 inches. I mean, it's still a little tight shoulder to shoulder. But it's definitely, you're not even giving them the option of being inside.
So instead of going this way,
correct.
It's going this way.
Correct. Yeah. So says the Gemara.
Because you can't have two people standing here.
Correct. Says the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Uminalan deba'ar b'havadarle." How do you know there were two people b'chlal? Maybe there was one guy in the front holding, the aron like this, and then one guy in the back. How do you know there's two people carrying it? Maybe there's just one guy in the front and one guy in the back. So it says the Gemara, "D'chsiv v'nosu haka'asim," which is plural, trey, and noisei hamikdash, nami trey. The double plural is 4. Now, Tan Rabbanon, a very, very interesting thing that a lot of people, I'm sure people realize, but there was one shulchan and one menorah from Moshe Rabbeinu, but Shlomo HaMelech decided to add 10 of each. So interestingly enough.
Why could you have one person standing over here?
I don't know why. I'm not sure. That's what everyone's asking. I don't know if it's just a Messiah that's how they carried it, or even on the outside, it's still going to be very tight. 36 inches, if I'm holding it like this, my arm and your arm are going to be close to touching. I'm not sure. Yeah, but you still had to pretend. You had to do your best. So says the Gemara, Asara shulchanos asa Shlomo HaMelech. Shneimar, Shlomo HaMelech made an additional 10 tables in the Beis HaMikdash, not used, but the additional 10 tables near the shulchan. Shneimar, v'yas shulchanos asara v'yanach behechel chamisha miyamin v'chamisha b'smol. 5 to the right of Moshe's, 5 to the left of Moshe's. Now, let me just say the outside. So this is the heichel, right? This is the room of the heichel. The shulchan is on the right side. When you enter, it's on the right side. It's front right. Now, the Gemara says there's 10. 5 to the right, 5 to the left. Now, the way it sounds like, the shulchan of Moshe is in the middle of the room, the centered, and there's 5 on the right side of the room, 5 on the left side of the room. That can't be. The shulchan is not on the left side of the room. All 10 have to be on the right side. So the Gemara is going to basically say, all 10 were on the right side. Moshe's was in the center, and 5 on the right, 5 on the left, all within the right side of the room. Actually, Art Scroll, 2 pages from now, we're not going to get to it today, they actually have a diagram of it, of like an overhead view of, it's 98.5. So you see how there's go to the top one, according to the view of Rabbi, there's the one in the middle, and then there's 5 on the right, 5 on the left. Think of it like a marching band. You got 5 on the right side, 5 on the left, the shulchan in the middle, all within the right side of the room. But not 5 on the right side of the room, 5 on the left side of the room, because the shulchan has to be all in one area. Yeah, they're going to do the same thing on the menorah also, by the way, the same thing. The menorah also, there were 10. It doesn't mean, 5 on the left, 5 on the right. No, it means within that sector of the room, there was the menorah of Moshe Rabbeinu in the center, flanked by 5 of Shlomo, 5 of Shlomo. It's the same thing.
There were 10
10 shulchanos, 11 shulchanos actually, right? 11 shulchanos because you had 10 plus 1 and 10 plus 1. Yeah. Not sure what the purpose of it was. Obviously, Shlomo Melech felt that it was necessary. But says the Gemara, the chamishim is small Pesach. Now, avim toimer chamishim yemin Pesach, v'chamishim is small Pesach. And if you think it means 5 on one side of the room and 5 on the opposite side of the room, imkin matzinu sheshulchan b'darim. That means that you'll find a shulchan in the south, and the shulchanas cannot be on the south side. They can't be on the left sector of the room because the shulchanas all have to be in the north.
No, only by rulers for Shem.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to that. Says the Gemara, "Vaterama shachatitel tzelin safin el shal Moshe beemtza chamisha miyaminoi v'chamisha mismoiloi." And the Gemara said the exact same thing by the menorah on the other side. Tan Rabbanon eser menorahs asa Shloima. Shloima Melech made 10 menorahs in addition to the menorah of Moshe Rabbeinu. V'yasa menorahs hazav asher mishpatam v'nasam beichel chamisha miyamin v'chamisha besmol. Same thing. V'im toimer chamisha miyamin apesach chamisha mismol apesach im kein matzinu menorah b'tzafin. And it can't be that there's 5 on the other side of the room because the menorahs have to be on the left side of the room, which is the darom side. V'atera amres menorah gnoichach hashulchan el shal Moshe beemtza chamisha miyamina v'chamisha mismol. Okay, now, Tani Chada, now the Gemara has one quick point. The basic premise is, if you think of the Heichel as this table, right? This is the Heichel from beginning to end.
Was there anything special specifically about the menorah of Shlomo, or of Moshe,
Well,
or the Mizbeach of...
Well, I mean, they were anointed with the Shemin HaMishcha, that would be a difference, but
They're one piece, right?
correct. Shlomo also, but yeah. Now, the Gemara is going to say like this, think of this table as the Heichel. The first half of the Heichel was empty. You only started all these formations of the menorah and the shulchan from halfway forward. Okay. So says the Gemara, Tani Chada, Mechatzi Bayis Levnim Hayumenachim. One brisa speaks it out that the shulchanos and the menorahs only started halfway through the Heichel. Only halfway through the Heichel. So the first half of the Heichel was completely empty. Now, the problem is another brisa. Tani Chada Mishlish Habayis Levnim Hayumenachim. The problem is the other brisa says, not that the Heichel was half empty, the Heichel was only a third empty, which means that it's not halfway through the table that the Shulchanos and the Menorah start, but it's only a third. So what's going on? The discrepancy. And the Gemara says there's no discrepancy. They're both saying the exact same thing. The question is, are you counting the Kodesh HaKodashim as part of it? If you're just counting the Heichel, it's halfway through. If you're counting the Kodesh HaKodashim, now it's a 3-sector area. It's now a third of the way through. It's saying the exact same thing. They're not. Think of it as, it's 100 feet and it's actually 60 amas, right? It's 40 amas and 20. So one brisa says it started 20 amas in. Yeah, because in the 40 amma room, it was 20 amas in. But the other brisa says, no, it was only a third of the way through. The answer is, are you counting the Kodesh HaKodashim? Is it 20 out of 60 or is it 20 out of 40? It's the same thing. So says the Gemara, Loi kasha, marka choshe bayis kachi kachim behedi heichel, marka loi choshe bayis kachi kachim behedi heichel. Just a matter of, are you referring to the heichel in and of itself or including the Kodesh HaKodashim? But they're saying the exact same thing. Now, the Gemara has one last point, we'll end with this. We had in our Mishnah that everything was going lengthwise, except for the Aron. But let's focus on the Shulchan and the Menorah. They're going lengthwise. So they're going in the flow of the rectangular room. They're going like that. That is the sheet of Rabbi. As we'll see right now, our Mishnah makes it sound like it's universally accepted. It's not. That was Rabbi's shita. Rav Elazar Rav Shimon disagrees. He actually feels that the Shulchanos and the Menorah were going against the room. They were going from, instead of the... It's hard to describe. I know east and west, south and north is not really going to help you guys, but think of it as this room. Exactly. They would not have the shulchan that way, like that. They would have it this way. That's Rav Elazar Rav Shimon. And he learns it out from the Aron. Meaning, is the Aron the exception or the rule? That's the shayla. So says the Gemara, Tan Rabban on Mizrach Umayrav Hayumenachim, the shulchanos were placed east to west along the length of the room, Divrei Rabbi. By the way, it's always a shaila in the Paiskim. Whenever you light the menorah, it's different minhagim. Is the menorah the same thing? Is it this way or that way? It could be totally in this machlokes tanam in shuls. Now, I don't mean in a house. In a shul, it's always on the southern side. Is it this way or that way? You look in this Paiskim. It's always different minhagim. So Divrei Rabbi, Rav Elazar Rav Shimon Oimer Tzafa in Vidar. Rav Elazar Rav Shimon disagrees with our Mishnah. He says no. The shulchan was not going east to west. It was going north to south. It was going against mamish like the Aron. It was going across the width of the building, not across the length. My time at the Rebbe, what's Rebbe's source? That it goes across the length of the building, like our Mishnah. Gomer menorah. Well, he bases it on the menorah. Again, the aron is definitely not like that. But he says, I compare it to the menorah. How did he know that the menorah was across the length? So it's very simple. Think of, again, this table is the heichal, and this stender is the entrance of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The pasuk says that there's called a ner ma'aravi. Now, forget about what you know about the ner ma'aravi, which is they're all pointed to the center. Forget that. Pashup shot. This is ma'ariv. Ner ma'aravi means that there's one candle that's the most west. That only works if it's going across the length of the building. If it's across the length of the building, there's the closest lamp and the furthest lamp. But if it's like this, like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, there's no ner ma'aravi. They're all ner ma'aravi because they're all right near the ma'ariv wall. He's going to say, no, ner ma'aravi means they're all pointed towards the center lamp. Fine. But Rebbe is just saying, pashup shot. I got pashup shot. Ner ma'aravi means that there's a ma'ariv ner and a mizrach ner, which means it's going that way. So says the Gemara, menorah, my time with the Rebbe, gom menorah. Ma menorah mizrach ma'ariv, afana mizrach ma'ariv. He compares everything to menorah. How did he know the menorah was going lengthwise? Menorah gufa menolan. Kedisem ner ma'aravi. That means that there's a ma'ariv lamp. Yarach oisei aron l'fnei Hashem, that there's one lamp l'fnei Hashem, there's one net lamp right by the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and every other lamp is further away. Michlal tekula lav l'fnei Hashem. V'yisal k'taytach tzafan v'darom, and if you believe, like Rabbi Shimon, that the menorah was going lengthwise across the entrance of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then kulanam l'fnei Hashem. Then there's no ner ma'aravi, they're all l'fnei Hashem. So says the Gemara, Rav Elazar of Shimon in my time. But where does Rav Elazar Shimon get it that it goes across the width of the Beis Hamikdash? Gomer me'aron. He learns it out from the aron. Aron we've already proven was in that direction. Says the Gemara, ma'aron tzafim v'daron afaham nami tzafim v'daron. Says the Gemara, Rebbe nami ligmar aron. It's a good point. Why doesn't Rebbe learn it out from the aron? Why is Rebbe focusing on the menorah, focus on the aron? And the answer is dan chutz mechutz vein dan chutz mefnim. Rebbe does not want to learn out from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The aron is in a different room. It's a different situation. He does not compare the shulchan and the menorah from the aron. The aron is its own department. Says the Gemara, Rav Elazar of Shimon ligmar menorah. Why does Rav Elazar of Shimon? Why does he learn out from the aron? What about the menorah? The answer is Amarloch menorah gufa tzafim v'daron. He says, I believe the shulchan and the menorah are all like the aron. The entire room, everything is going across the length. The shulchan, the aron, and the menorah. Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara. Elohoksiv yarach oso aron ubanav. Then what's the ner ma'aravi? If the entire menorah is going across the entranceway of the Kodesh HaKadoshim on the left side, then what's the ner ma'aravi? They're all ma'ariv. The answer is the ner ma'aravi is the center point. They were all pointed towards that ner ma'aravi. It's a reference to the center. The mitzadid luhu atzdude, that they were all pointed towards the center lamp, which was forward facing towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. They were all pointing towards that center lamp. So the Gemara says, "Tanya el mul pnei hamenorah iru shivas aneris mamashayim mitzadin pneim klapin erem tzoi," that the wicks were pointed towards that center lamp. Rav Nasan says, "Mekan shem tzoi meshubach." We'll end with this. You see that the middle is always the most praiseworthy because the ner ma'aravi is the most chashiv and it's the middle, and they're all pointed towards that. All right, we'll stop here. We'll pick up tomorrow because it's a continuation to tomorrow's daf.